what is the Smithsonian? Do people know? Do you know where the Smithsonian came from? Because I didn't before I started researching it.
It's a group of research museums, research centers, and it's basically all administered by the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Founded in 1846, and it was basically to just increase the diffusion of knowledge. That was their slogan.
Auspiciously as the diffusion of knowledge.
Right.
Seems like not so much.
Right.
I like the guy it's named after and its founding donor because it's named after a British scientist, James Smithson.
Yeah.
But he never even came to the U.S.
He never
set foot here.
Never visited the U.S.
Not once.
Had this institute that he, established, created.
Yeah.
And
it's called the Nation's Attic for its eclectic holdings of 154 million items. Has 19 museums, 21 libraries, 9 research centers, and a zoo. We don't know if Sasquatch is there. Mostly located in the District of Columbia. They have over 200 institutions and museums in 45 states. Puerto Rico and Panama are Smithsonian affiliates. The original endowment or donation from James Smithson was purportedly 105 sacks containing 104,960 gold sovereigns, which equaled $500,000 roughly at the time of donation, but today would equivalent out to something like $13 million on the last estimate I've seen online. And even funnier, the money was originally invested by the U.S. Treasury in bonds issued by the state of Arkansas, which soon defaulted.
Yeah,
and
they lost all the money.
Yeah, so they get this endowment and they gamble it and they lose it. So it took some convincing from former President John Quincy Adams to persuade Congress to restore the funds with interest.
Yeah.
So they did make good on that. And then after the money was actually there was kind of some debate on what the institution should be. Like, what is its identity, kind of what's its mission statement.
They wanted to develop the U.S., the national identity.
That's per the Smithsonian website.
Yes.
That was their agenda to aid in the process or become part of the process of developing the U.S. national identity.
Right.
What does that mean? That seems to mean exactly what we have read about is that, again, that kind of friendly takeover in this instance, or I guess more friendly than just all-out battle and war, which we did a lot of that and then just took over. But so, yeah, it's trying to develop that PR story of how we became to be.
Yeah.
The newly founded Bureau of Ethnology drove an agenda of manifest destiny and the new theory of evolution, according to Jim Vieira and all other authors.
A lot of these guys talk about that.
Yeah, and here's one of the sketchiest parts. The Smithsonian Institute is neither governmental or private. So it's kind of in this gray area. It's run by a trust.
Right.
So it's kind of like they have jurisdiction, but they have no oversight.
Yeah.
Which
they kind
is
of just
Wild West.
Yeah, it's a gray area.
Next, we have these awesome images from Squire and Davis.
Yeah, these are so cool.
The first one we have is Serpent Mound, and again, that is very nearby or close enough that we've been to it a couple of times, and it's a really interesting mound because it's situated up on like a peninsular bluff. Like it drops off of those edges, so it's in this really kind of amazing vantage point from up on that hill to have that mound
sits above
on top of it
a
as
crater.
Well. Yeah,
an ancient crater.
It's a really cool spot.
There's a lot of strange weather patterns that crater generates. Strange
kind of energy?
weather patterns. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe something of it.
I'm not sure if you can really prove that, but there's definitely some strange electrical activity for sure, storm-wise.
Right on.
And Squire and Davis were two guys from Chillicothe. They're the guys that sketched this image that you guys see here. And they wrote a book in 1848, and it's Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And they just went all over the country, through the river systems, spent a lot of time here in Ohio. Obviously, being from Chillicothe, They documented many sites, and they didn't mention giants, but they did conclude that the prehistoric race, there was a superior race that was more advanced than the modern day Native Americans, or and basically that they were responsible for building the mounds. Later on, I think they changed their position on that.
Okay.
But this is, when they're out there exploring, this is the views that they had then
Right.
as they're writing this book.
Right.
And
this is
they're in it. They are like legit Indiana Jones
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. They're out there in the mix. But that view became an issue, right, with the hierarchy of the Smithsonian for decades.
Right, yeah.
And specifically by John Wesley Powell, which we've read a lot about him over the course of studying for this episode, and his kind of role and thought processes he rolled out or kind of tried to enforce. But the lost race theory was popular.
Yeah.
It did not succeed, though, in becoming the new paradigm that the Smithsonian was building. And there we go to calling about the development of the U.S., building the development of it. To this day, the official doctrine, the Powell doctrine, is that the mounds were built by ancestors of the Native Americans, not a lost race.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting...
And still to this day, that's the...
when you have Squire and Davis going out as, the first guys to do some publications actually about this, and to have their view contradict John Wesley Powell, who then would kind of write the rules on how to report on this stuff, is very...
So who's John Wesley Powell?
He was the U.S. Director of Ethnology in 1879, and he ran the Smithsonian in its early years. He founded the Bureau of American Ethnology in 1879. The study of characteristics of various peoples and the differences in relationships between them is ethnology, and its discipline
Yeah.
defined.
And they were pretty much like a storehouse of records. That was one of their main directives, was gathering materials of North American Indians. So they were out there gathering artifacts, and John Wesley Powell was kind of a badass. He lost his arm in the Civil War.
Yeah.
He was a geologist. He went through all the way through the Grand Canyon.
That's crazy.
Was one of the earlier explorers to really kind of get down into the more remote sections of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
And and so he was a famous explorer in his own right and very well accomplished.
Right.
And basically that expedition was like 1879 to 4 years, 4 or 5 years and some people think, and a lot of these guys write about him being a champion of Darwin's theory of evolution.
Right.
That there's this sort of like scientific cabal, if you will, this belief that, these guys are, trying to push their views,
Right.
their interests. Some people that were connected with Powell in later years, which we'll talk about, Cyrus Thomas, and then the Herzliya. Yes?
Oh, yeah. We'll definitely talk about both of them. To Powell's own agenda, or maybe it was his agenda, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the Smithsonian kind of making him do it. Who knows? But he had the Powell Doctrine, which dictated researching and reporting of pre-Columbian settling. But his decree stated basically that no anthropological research should consider any talk of lost tribes henceforth, while also describing natives as uncultured, savage, and lacking signs of higher intellect. Hence, it will be seen that it is illegitimate to use any pictographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of the continent by Columbus for historic purposes. By this declaration, Powell effectively discarded any and all artifacts containing writing from consideration of historic analysis, and in doing so protected his earlier declaration that any contact with peoples from other portions of the world is plainly illegitimate. Thus, none of the numerous inscriptions and artifacts which clearly attest to the possibility of ancient contact could be considered as evidence which might challenge the isolationist dogma. Some of those artifacts contain evidence of writing which strongly supports the possibility of ancient contact. That is crazy. The example that we have is this out-of-place artifacts that John Wesley Powell talks about. We have the Grave Creek Mound, and we have an image of the Grave Creek tablet, which definitely has inscription
Yeah, I think that
on it.
was an excerpt from Jim Vieira. I think that was kind of his view that thus none of the numerous, the inscriptions and artifacts, and it's, yeah.
Look at that little Grave Creek tablet, though. it looks like cuneiform or...
Yeah, so some of the out-of-place artifacts that John Wesley Powell's talking about is the Grave Creek tablet. And again, this is a tablet that's deemed a fake. It's been, researched, and I guess, most universities agree that it's another one of these hoaxes.
Okay.
And it's highly controversial, and there's the Grave Creek Mound, which is a really huge mound in Moundsville, West Virginia, just right on the Ohio River, near Wheeling.
Okay.
And so that's where supposedly this tablet was taken from. And the Grave Creek Mound actually has stories of, guess who?
Mothman.
The Mothman.
He's everywhere.
That's right, baby.
He's everywhere.
How did... and
don't visit me, though, Mothman.
And the Men in Black.
Don't scare me.
So the Men in Black have been seen around the Grave Creek Mound. The Mothman's been seen around the Grave Creek Mound.
Those son of a guns are everywhere, too.
We've got this weird tablet being found. So it's highly controversial, but, there's a lot of other things that were found there, too, like these crazy copper bracelets and trinkets and seashells again. 1,700 ivory beads.
I wonder where those came from.
150 pieces of mica jewelry, and there were giants that were found. There's like this queen's tomb, and there's an upper chamber, and she was 7 feet in length, and there was the king was in the lower chamber. So inside there, they have top chamber with the queen, lower chamber is the king.
Okay.
And the king
gets
was
top bunk.
Guess so. And that skeleton, according to this, exceeded 8 feet in length.
I mean,
Is the story there?
She's a tall lady, and that's a tall guy. Yeah, there's just account after account. It's just insane. Cyrus Thomas, you mentioned him earlier. In 1882, Cyrus Thomas was appointed the director of Division of Mound Exploration. So this guy was really in the mix. And he's quietly was a believer in the legendary lost race theory. So again, he's referencing back to it. Native Americans talk about it. He was aware of hundreds of reports of giant skeletons, strange artifacts that seemed to be from other lands. Sophisticated geometry, astronomy, and mathematics were being revealed from earthworks regardless of the Smithsonian's involvement. And so he dispatched just research crew after research crew out into the field to investigate the mounds and find out what was going on. And his primary goal, I believe that he actually penned himself, was to make a collection of
skeletons and crania.
Especially crania.
Yeah.
Found in the mounds or the graves. So either let's say this is a time
he was a believer of diffusionism as well.
But he had to have been hearing these stories too.
Yeah.
If all these mounds were...
So his crew was out there all over, combing the entire country.
Yeah. But for his prime directive to be the skeleton remains and, most importantly, the crania.
Yeah.
This guy had a real agenda. He wasn't just had no clue about what was going on and just bumped into this. So there must have been some kind of chatter going on that he was already aware of this. You know what I mean? But yeah, diffusionism, go and explain that, because pretty easy concept, just the term itself, maybe not a lot of people are familiar with.
This is the definition. School of thought that believes throughout history there has been worldwide contact via the oceans and trade routes.
And
So
then there's isolationism.
Isolationism is basically became the norm, where it's believed that all of these influences and cultures that have created similar technology and culture, that they all sort of came up with it
on their own.
Separately, and that there was no diffusion of culture or ideas, and that they were held back by these oceans and these boundaries.
Right.
But
Couldn't get across the water, couldn't navigate that far.
People that, diffusionism was 1920s became really big. John Keel, the Mothman prophecies.
John
He
Keel.
was really into that in the 70s when it kind of came back around.
He's great.
Let's see. Yeah. So that's diffusionism, isolationism.
Remember how to say this name?
Go ahead. Jeffrey pronounced it a few times.
As best I can remember, the name is Ailes Herdlitzka. And he was hired by the Smithsonian in 1910 to be the curator of the Division of Physical Anthropology. Previous to that, he was involved in the eugenics movement. It was pre-Nazism philosophy, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yep.
Herdlitzka would have bones and skeletons sent to him, and they would just disappear. So when we talk about evidence, where are the bones, where are the skeletons? In a lot of those articles and a lot of those finds and a lot of those digs, they were sent to the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
Or the Smithsonian representative was there.
Right.
So I find it hard to believe that if you have that many accounts and documented encounters, that's all fabricated. That's all fluff. That seems very hard to believe. But what have you.
Right. But yeah, I mean, the government was at war they were at war with all these tribes.
Right.
And they're trying to come in and, continue to spread the
Right.
American dream.
So it's a strategy plan. It's a think tank, the Smithsonian, and all of these different factions of it to
Maybe.
it seems like
I mean,
from what they said, the government did not want to identify the Native Americans as, true human beings because we would not be able to take their land if we